Thank you all for coming. I appreciate your time and your interest. I want to thank the RISC-V International Association for the opportunity to present our data to the RISC-V ecosystem and designer community. We appreciate your support. So the title of this presentation is Application Forecasting in a Heterogeneous World. And we titled it that way for a couple of reasons. One, as the SoC market has evolved, the SoCs that are being designed today are generally heterogeneous in nature. The days of a single CPU core from a single vendor are probably over. And going forward, the silicon is going to share many different CPU types from many different vendors, hence the heterogeneous title. And also, we wanted to segment this report differently from other research that's been done by others previously. So up to this point, people have been trying to figure out, okay, how big is the ARM bucket? How big is the x86 bucket? How big is this bucket? How big is that bucket? And that's fine, but that really doesn't work very well in a heterogeneous world. So what we've done, and I'll show you a slide in a couple minutes, we've segmented some of the data in this report by 4 functional categories of things that we think CPU cores, not just RISC-V cores, but CPU cores in general, are going to be tasked to perform in SoCs going forward. And we think that looking at the market that way gives a little bit deeper perspective on what the use cases are, what people are looking to do, what the architectures they're going to create are going to resemble. So I think you've seen this slide. Callista presented our data in her keynote, and John Coder from Synopsys used some of our data also in his keynote. And generally, this looks at the slide on the left, looks at the RISC-V SoC market unit volumes over time, growing to about 16 billion or so by 2030, about a 40% or greater than 40% compound annual growth rate. Obviously, coming from a very small base, the CAGR is very high. As we move through the forecast period into years beyond it, obviously the CAGR is going to reduce. The data on the right are different segments that we pulled out of the report that we're doing, indicating different growth rates in different areas. So for example, MCUs in wearables, AI acceleration in the consumer end application, the major category, for example, notebooks in computing, things like that, to give some perspective on the fact that RISC-V has percolated beyond just being considered an MCU architecture into higher performing architectures in many, many applications. As a reinforcement to that message is this slide that looks at where RISC-V is being used in several applications. So for example, the Meta training and inference accelerator that's been announced is for a data center AI acceleration application, and in enterprise storage in computing. Those are both higher end applications, not certainly not MCU type applications. And then you do have MCU consumer still, an application processor for edge computing. So the message here is that RISC-V, as the ecosystem has evolved and been fleshed out, it's provided better access to tools, software, building blocks that an SoC designer would look to acquire to build around the CPU core that he's choosing for his application. And the RISC-V ecosystem now is starting to flesh out and provide that support. And as more support is provided, the confidence level in the design community for using RISC-V gains momentum, and there's kind of a synergistic effect that one starts amplifying the other. And we think that going through the years in this report, that kind of a scenario does play out. So this looks at the SoC unit shipments that are going to use RISC-V. This is done by the end product type within the applications. So just to give you a feel for this, there's 53 end applications in this report with 10 different CPU product types profiled for each application. So things like a general purpose CPU, an AI accelerator, a DSP, an MCU, a GPU, a discrete security part, network processor or network device, which could be wireless or wired, either way, things of that sort, to give a feel for where the growth is going to come from at a device level. And as you can see, by 2030, the largest category is MCU, which makes sense because MCUs have already shipping in the billions of units. And as RISC-V gets adopted into these architectures, it makes sense that they would be the biggest. But also of note are things like AI accelerator, the green line there. That starts to creep up in terms of unit volumes and starts to become a very large segment. Same with network device, same with security. So as the ecosystem's fleshed out, you get this effect like you've dropped a pebble in a pond, where the rings start to percolate out from the center, and as each one moves further and further out, it brings in another type of application, another type of SoC, and the net result is the unit volumes build one on top of the other. So this chart is courtesy of Synopsys. It looks at where they're targeting their ARC-V processor IP product, the one that they just announced. And as you can see, there's a range of application types that they're targeting: industrial, automotive, consumer, storage, networking. And within those, there's granularity in terms of the performance of the device, the CPU cores that they're offering. And we think that this, as time moves on, the Synopsys and other companies will build on this list of applications and start targeting things like data center, like the previous slide that I showed looked at, and other higher end applications. So the ecosystem itself will flesh out and cover just about every niche you can think of. This looks at the RISC-V penetration by functionality. So this goes back again to what I said at the very beginning, the heterogeneous nature of the SoC market today. So these are the 4 functions we've identified that will commonly be performed, or I should say the SoC, the CPU cores will commonly be tasked with performing on the SoCs going forward. So something like a deeply embedded finite state machine replacement, an MCU, a coprocessor, or an apps processor. And as you might expect, the finite state machine type of functionality is the largest. Those are used everywhere, in just about every device you can think of. But the interesting thing here is the yellow line, which represents the application processor. It starts out low, but it starts gaining momentum, we think, right around 2026, 2027, and starts to assume a higher growth rate than the other categories. And we think that's indicative of, again, the introduction of higher performing cores, more tools, more software, more building blocks to put around those cores, and people are naturally going to use RISC-V to be one of the main components of an apps processor going forward. And as the broader market grows and adds applications, it's very likely that an apps processor is going to be used more and more in these kinds of applications. So the unit volumes grow, the revenues grow. Now this chart looks at the RISC-V IP market and by royalties, revenues, or licensing and maintenance and support revenues. And as you can tell in the early years, it's fairly small revenues, early days. And as time has moved on, the revenues for licensing and maintenance and service grow. Royalties lag because it takes 2 or 3 years to get from the design into production and shipping and volume. But an interesting thing starts to happen, we believe, in 2027, where the licensing and the royalty revenues are about equal. And then from there on, the royalty revenues outpace the licensing revenues, and by 2030, become about 2x. The royalty revenues become about 2x the licensing revenues. And this is historically true in the broader IP market, where you see when a market matures, the royalties exceed the licensing revenues by about 2x. The problem with that kind of statement is the word mature. If the IP market were mature, this conference wouldn't exist. None of you people would be sitting here because there wouldn't be any room for a new architecture. And of course, we know that's not the case. Maturity in this context means that the ecosystem has grown to the point where designers feel confident in adopting the RISC-V CPU architecture, IP architecture, to use in their silicon solutions. From that point of view, it's matured. But certainly not from a growth point of view, not from a revenue point of view. That's going to continue as far as we can see. We also put on the bottom of that slide some bullet points. So in doing the analysis and collecting the data for this report, we interviewed over 30 companies so far and counting so far. We were able to determine that Andes has currently over 30% of the share of market by volume for RISC-V. We think that going forward, today, for example, Andes, Codasip, Sci-5, T-Head are the main leaders in the market. We also identified that do-it-yourself as a category, not necessarily a company, is a large portion of the activity today. Going forward, we expect, or suspect maybe is a better word, that the activity in do-it-yourself will decline somewhat as other CPU IP vendors for RISC-V enter the market and people decide that it's easier to just license a core than doing it yourself. Getting the open source license from RISC-V International and then building a CPU core from scratch, not a trivial task. So if you have the resources and the money, you can do that, or otherwise you can license it from one of the current RISC-V CPU IP vendors. On the right side at the bottom, we listed some new sources of RISC-V companies that are entering the market. Imagination has signaled that they are going to transition over to RISC-V. Synopsys just announced yesterday. Tenstorrent, Ventana Microsystems, and others we think are also going to enter this market. So that kind of a snapshot represents a growing market, an evolving market, not a mature market. This it represents the RISC-V revenues on a regional basis, reaching about, we think about 100 billion or thereabouts out of the total SoC market by 2030. China, we believe, will be the largest consumer of RISC-V SoCs, but very close behind them will be Asia Pacific and the Americas. We think there's plenty of opportunity for everybody in this. This could change, obviously, but we think that's probably the way it's going to look by 2030. So in summary, in a heterogeneous SoC world, we expect multiple ICs are going to share die area on the same part, with different RISC-V cores for a variety of functions that we've identified, deeply embedded, FSU replacements, MCU, a coprocessor, and an applications processor. By 2030, we project that RISC-V will experience greater than 40% compound annual growth rate for unit shipments. See chip revenues achieve almost $100 billion in total by 2030. Deliver IP revenues in the area of about $1.6 billion and achieve nearly a 25% penetration rate by unit volume by 2030. The RISC-V adoption is projected to be highest in consumer and computer applications, and that the computer application makes sense. There are a lot of lower cost solid state flash drive shipping today into the market, but we think that changes over time as higher performing CPU cores enter and get adopted into other applications, higher performing applications that are going to start shipping in volume. So eventually that will flip, and the solid state drives will still be a driver of the market, but not as big a driver, not as big an influence as they are today. Penetration of RISC-V into the data center is already starting to occur. We think that that is going to continue and accelerate, probably starting around 2025. The RISC-V CPU vendors, we believe, are going to continue to introduce higher performing cores every year, inching closer to the top end of the performance range, which is understandable given the nature of competition. And one thing I want to do want to point out is I did not factor in anything about chiplets into this report. Chiplets are still emerging as a technology and as a market. A lot of work still needs to be done to resolve some of the issues that are facing the chiplet market. I think that once those issues do get solved, chiplets are going to represent a real growth area for RISC-V, especially for accelerators used, small accelerators spread around into the chiplets onto the platforms that are going to be introduced. So last word, a word about the report. Thanks to sponsorships from many of the market leaders in the RISC-V community today, a free version of this report is going to be openly distributed and available to, we think, thousands of interested readers. That version is about 50 to 60 pages. A full version containing all the data behind the charts that I've showed in all the granularity, approximately 200 pages, will be available to sponsors. Both versions are going to include a RISC-V ecosystem directory, which will list out the company name, headquarters, things of that sort, what markets are being targeted. This is going to include information from sponsors and other companies wishing to participate. We welcome and encourage any companies in the RISC-V ecosystem to complete an online company profile by visiting our website at the SHD Group to be included in this directory. And limited sponsorship openings are still available. We're planning on releasing this part around the second week of December, if fingers crossed, everything goes right. That will include a full version of the report, as well as promotion in the free version and other benefits. And for more information, please go to our website, sponsorships at the shdgroup.com. Thank you all for your time and your attention. We appreciate it. And thanks again to the RISC-V Association for the opportunity to present our data. Thank you.